So people always ask me, what's it like to play blind football? And I always say to them, it's like driving without windows. You see, there are those external obstacles, like a metal goalpost or moving players. But really, there are those internal obstacles which make you feel lost, stuck, and indecisive. I teach blind football to people, not because I'm seeking out the next blind Pele, or because I want to frighten you with an inch of your life, but because I think it's the quickest and easiest way for you to experience darkness, both literally and metaphorically. But we're not going to do that today. What I'm going to share with you today is, what are those obstacles in terms of diversity? I'm going to show you how you can improve that in terms of our recruitment, retention, and progression. Does that sound all right? Yeah. So, I'm going to ask you a question. So can we have our slide up, our Mentimeter slide? So you're going to need your phones to answer this question, but I want you to, is the number up on there so you know what to do? Have you used this before? So I want you to think about diversity in terms of, is it something you think you have to do, you ought to do, or you want to do? Cool. So what are our results?
Want to do is 60%.
Okay. How about the other two?
Ought to do at 17.
Mm-hmm.
Have to do at 22.
There we go. A nice little spread. So I'm going to try and address each of those three groups. And I'm going to start with have to do. So have to do is kind of when you think there's a legal responsibility, maybe, you think you're going to get in trouble if you don't do it. And I want you to think about how you feel necessarily when there's something that you have to do. Maybe you feel fearful, maybe you feel angry, frustrated. So I'm going to tell you a little story about many years ago when I was just after I graduated and I got my first job in IT. What a wonderful industry it is, eh? And I remember I did what a lot of students did. You kind of move around from house to house, and every 6 months or so I'd move to another house and then move to another house. Usually because the landlord decided to sell the property or some other reason. There was, rats or mushrooms growing on the ceiling, that kind of thing. Anyway, so I was living in this one property and the landlord decided he was going to sell the house. So I thought, well, I've got to find somewhere to live. And so it was those old fashioned days when you had to sort of go through newspapers and things like that. I rung up the landlord, said, yeah, really interested in the property. When can I come and view it? So I went to work that day, and I used to live in Cardiff. I used to work in Swansea. And so it was a bit of a commute, a 50-mile commute, and we got stuck in heavy traffic on the motorway. And when I got to the property, the landlord had already left. But there was some workman there, and he was doing some work on the property, just bringing it up to scratch, getting rid of the rats and the mushrooms off the ceiling. And I said, well, I might as well have a look around anyway. So I had a look around the property, rung up the landlord the following day and said, I really like this place. I'll be happy to take it. So I posted in my deposit, those things, posted a check. And then a few weeks later, the day to move in came. And I got to that point. It was a Friday evening. And I remember walking into the property, and bear in mind that at this point, we didn't actually meet face to face. And so when I walked in, he saw me and he thought, I'm not sure if you can see properly. So then I kind of sat down and he said to me, how are you going to sign the contract? I said, well, I have rented properties before. Is it a standard assured short hold tenancy? He said, yes. I said, okay, well, I'm pretty familiar with that. He goes, well, you can't sign it if you can't read it. I said, well, you could read it to me. And he goes, what happens if you're cooking chips and you knock the pan over? I said, well, actually, I don't eat chips. He goes, what happens if you're walking up the stairs and you fall down them? I said, well, I'll get up. And this kind of questioning went on and on and on. So I said to him, I tell you what, speak to my current landlord, and if he sort of feels there's any considerations, any problems, any questions that you've got, then put them to him, and then maybe I'll have a chat on Monday. So I went home and called him on the Monday, and I said, did you speak to my landlord? He says, no, I've decided I'm not going to rent it to you. So bear in mind, the house I'm living in has been sold. And so I had to go back to the lady who'd bought the house, and she literally was moving in that week, and said, by the way, are you happy for me to stay in my room? I know you've just imagine when you've bought your house, right? You've just bought your beautiful dream home on the Brighton seafront, right? And there's someone living there who says he'd like to stay for a few more days. So that's what happened. I was literally homeless. But what it made me really think about was, would it really change his behaviour? We went to court, I won my case, it took about 3 years. But what I reflected on was that I don't think he changed how he thought about it. He thought that I'd withheld that information from him, that I hadn't disclosed the fact that I was blind. And he also felt that I'd wasted his time. And I believe that if he went through that situation again, he would probably just make sure that he met that person face to face, so they could discriminate up front rather than after the fact. So that's what happens sometimes when you have to do it. So how about when we ought to do something? So that's very much around social norms, peer pressure. Maybe it's those people telling you you've got to put pronouns on your LinkedIn profile. You don't have to do it, but you might feel like you ought to do it because everybody else is doing it. And the sorts of emotions that tend to be associated with things that you ought to do tend to be guilt and shame. Not very positive emotions either. But when you want to do something, then the types of emotions that you associate with that are hope and curiosity. Now, when I think about diversity, and it's very easy to us to think about it in terms of, the protected characteristics on the Equality Act. But the reason why they make a difference is because people who come from different backgrounds have had different experiences. And people who've had different experiences think differently. So for me, diversity is very much about diversity of thought and not just those demographic characteristics. And if you look at all of the failures in governance, whether it's Enron, I recommend you read that book, The Smartest People in the World. If you look at the kids charity, you look at all of those charities and organizations that had a failure in governance, it was often a single reason behind it, and it was groupthink. It's because they had a group of people who all thought the same. They'd all had similar educations, all been to Oxford or Cambridge. They all did the same things. They all went to the Bullington Club. And therefore, they think the same. So for me, diversity is about thinking differently. If you're not in your organization going into the office and someone says something to you and you say to yourself, I never thought of that, then you're probably not in the right place. Because with diverse thinking, it's the types of ideas that are going to grow your business and generate those ideas which create the next set of products and services that we need in the future. That's where innovation comes about, through diversity of thinking. Does that make sense? Yes. Cool. So I'm going to talk a little bit about, I'm going to have a little bit of a rant actually. Is that okay? So, we talked about the statistics, and Grace was talking about, gathering all of the data. And so I'm sure you've all got these diversity forms, haven't you? Has anyone filled one in recently? By the way, nodding your head, raising your hand, any other form of non-verbal communication is a complete waste of time. Just so you know. So I've got a bit of a pet hate with diversity forms, by the way. And this is why, because I genuinely believe they sometimes bring about more division than they're worth. You see, back in the day, if I just take one category, which is ethnicity, right? So back in the day, you were either white or non-white. In America, they called it the one-drop rule. So even if you were half, a quarter, an eighth, whatever, you were basically considered black if you weren't white. And then the Asians came along and said, well, I'm not black, so I want a category for me as well. And then the Orientals came along and said, well, we're different from the Indians, so we'd like a category as well. And then the blacks went, well, everyone else is kind of, so, we said, well, let's have a category for the blacks who are from Africa and the blacks who are from the Caribbean. And then the white people thought, oh, we're missing out on this as well. So how about we'll have a group for the Irish, and the Scottish and the Welsh. And then they decided, how about when they're mixed together? So now we need a group for the blacks and the whites. But then they never seem to have mixed groups for the Asians and the blacks and the Chinese and the blacks. And so I kind of think sometimes we have to think about, why are we collecting all this data? What's the end purpose of it all? What are we trying to achieve by collecting all this data, and what we're going to do with all that data? So that's my rant over, okay? I'm not telling you not to use them, just saying, have a think. Because at the end of the day, we're going to literally have more categories. You can't have a category for everyone. And as we try to make everybody feel included, you're still creating more and more divisions. So if you look at general tech, and when I worked in tech, it was typical type of tech group. So I would say the average tech person tends to be young, white, and male. So I thought I would choose a little profile of someone who's the complete opposite to that. Someone who's black, female, and older. Someone kind of like my mum, who's very not techie at all. My mum's that type of person who, when you download a file and then she'll kind of edit it and then she'll save it and she's lost it. She goes, where's it gone? It's in the downloads folder, Mum. It's okay. So let's think about how we might recruit her into tech. So the first thing you want to do, so she's really interested in one of your jobs that you've posted. And she looked at the job application. It looks really cool. You've even sort of said, we're welcome and we open applications from people from all sorts of different backgrounds. So she thinks, oh, that sounds like a really cool company to go and work for. And then she goes and looks on your website. And every picture she sees on the website, whether it's members of staff there or whether it's the customers that you deal with, are people don't look anything like her. And then she goes, well, you know what, I'll give it a chance anyway. And then she goes to the interview panel and she sees the same. So there are simple things you can do is, look at your visuals, what's on your websites, and think about how you organize your panels and who's in your interview panels and how representative that is. Anyway, Jean, that's her name, that's my mum's name. Jean gets the job. She's joined your wonderful company. But after a few months, maybe after a year, she decides she wants to leave. So why will she want to leave? So there tends to be two things at work here. One of them is what's going on in the office, and the other is what's going on outside the office. So when you talk about what's going on in the office, that's the kind of general chit-chat that goes around, by the coffee room, by people's desks. Jean doesn't like football. She doesn't like talking about the pub and everything else that goes on with it. So again, thinking about the sorts of conversations that we have in an office environment that make people feel like they belong there. And then, what do you do after work? And the sorts of things that you might do. Jean doesn't drink either. So if your after work scenario is going down to the pub, getting boozed up, and then kind of that's how you meet your clients and that's how you woo your clients, how inclusive is that for her? And then she manages to stay. She decides to stay. You persuaded her to stay. Because she's ambitious and she wants to be promoted. And, you know, she's an ambitious person. She's got aspirations of leadership. Now, in terms of the obstacles here, they're very much those internal obstacles in terms of the biases that we have, in terms of who you perceive as eligible to lead. And maybe you've got leadership programs. When I speak in lots of organizations, and you'll have some high potentials that you will believe are your future leaders of the business. But what are those? What are you using to come up with those shortlists? How do you group those people together? There are so many cognitive biases that are at play here, whether it's the halo effect, which is what Edward Thorndike discovered. And when he asked people, you know, he got a load of leaders and he said, and most of these people were tall. So we perceive leaders have to be tall. Did they? Maybe they have to be loud. Can you be a leader if you're introverted? So think about the sorts of biases that you have when it comes to that. So to recap, because we are going to do a few things later, I really want you to think about your thoughts around diversity and whether it's something you think you have to do, something you think you ought to do, or whether it's something you want to do. And recognizing that only really when you get to the place where you want to do it, will you start to address some of the other things that are going on. Those are the situations when you start to look at your interview panels, what's on your website, the sorts of people that are going to be interviewing the people coming into your organization. You're going to start looking at your culture within your organization and how you communicate within the business and out of the business. And you're also going to think about what sorts of people you think are going to be the best leaders going forwards. So I am going to give you will have the opportunity to ask me some questions later because we're going to be on a panel. If we don't answer any of those questions on the panel, I will give you the opportunity to ask me some questions later. And if I can't answer it then, by all means, get in touch with me on social media, okay? But for now, I want to leave you with a thought. And it's this: what are you going to do differently as a result of today? And whether you write that down now or you write that down at the end of the session, I want you to write down one thing that you're going to do differently as a result of everything you've heard. And then I'm going to play a final video to you. So I want you to think of, I'm going to tell you this for now. What's the hardest thing that you think that I had to deal with as a professional athlete? Anyone know? Racism. Anything else? Injury. One more.
Actually making it.
Oh, getting there. Yeah. All of you. Grace, can you play that video for me?
Get inside.
That's me getting into an ice bath. Has anyone here been in an ice bath, by the way? Yes. Yeah. Okay, so you'll understand this. So what we do after every single game is that we have to get into an ice bath. You hear that word again, don't you? Have to. And my teammates used to, they used to have a right kind of ball, me getting into the ice bath because I was a right wuss, right? And they used to go down to reception in the hotel, and we used to get loads and loads of buckets and bags of ice, and then they'd come up to the ice bath and they'd fill up the ice bath with all of this ice, and then they'd knock on my door, and I'd like, just pretend to be asleep, but they knew I wasn't. And then they literally said, come on, Daz, it's time to go, it's time to go. And I'd be dragged literally to this ice bath. And I got in there. And we have to do 10 minutes, by the way. 10 minutes in the ice bath. There's literally ice cubes floating around you. So I did 10 minutes in the ice bath. And then on this one occasion, I went back to my room, wrapped up in a towel, got in my bed, and I was just checking my phone, and I heard a ping, and it was this video. That video. And I realized that like they were all just laughing at me. And that's when I kind of thought, well, you know, this is something I ought to do. I should be able to get over this. Like, and also it was that embarrassment. It was like, God, Darren, you sound like a little baby. You know, like when you're experiencing something sometimes, when you're in the moment, you don't really realize what's happening. But when you watch yourself from an external point of view, that's when you really notice it. And so that was the point at which I kind of thought, I need to do something about it. And that's the point when I shifted to deciding that I really wanted to be able to do this ice bath. And what happens when I make that switch in mindset? Because it's really what we call reframing. So instead of telling myself that I couldn't do it, I now started to ask the question, how do I do it? And I became curious and hopeful that there actually might be an outcome. There might be a way of doing this without screaming like a little baby. And so I started to investigate, how can I sit in an ice bath for 10 minutes without screaming? I came across Wim Hof. Wim Hof's done over an hour in an ice bath. So if he can do an hour, I'm sure I can do 10 minutes. He said up until that point, I'd been going on to PubMed, which is where you find all the research articles in terms of what's going on. And I was looking for reasons why an ice bath was actually bad for you. And this is what happens when you shift your mindset. When you go from something you have to do to something you want to do, then you start to look for ways that you can actually do it. You start to look for those solutions to some of those challenges that you're facing in your business, whatever it is. So, whatever you do with your business is next. Always remember this. See, I always said that the eyes are useless when the mind is blind. And what I mean by that is that there's no point in being able to see if you don't use what's in between your ears. And so your mindset is absolutely key to everything you do. Your thoughts determine how you feel, and your feelings determine the actions that you take. And when you're in a negative mindset, the actions that you're going to take are not going to be progressive and help your businesses going forward. So I hope that's been of value to you. I'm going to hand back over to Grace, and then we're going to sit down and go on to the next session.